The pristine surface of Lake Evergreen reflected the winter sunset, like a mirror of ice and fire. No one could have predicted how this frozen landscape would become the backdrop for a chance encounter that would forever change the lives of two strangers. A single father with mounting debts and a tech billionaire with secrets deeper than the lake itself. Their worlds were never meant to collide. But on that frigid January morning, fate had other plans. One reckless step on thin ice was about to spark an extraordinary journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, purpose, and second chances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mason Reed pulled his worn pickup truck into the gravel driveway of his modest lakeside cabin. The tires crunched over the frozen ground. As he turned off the ignition and sat for a moment, the silence enveloping him like an old friend. The dashboard clock read 7:42 p.m. He'd made it home earlier than expected from his shift at Wilson's hardware store. At 36, his face carried the weathered lines of someone who had experienced more hardship than his years suggested. But his eyes still held a quiet determination. From the passenger seat, he grabbed the small paper bag containing the discounted frozen pizza the store manager had let him take home. Another meal that his 9-year-old daughter, Sophie, would pretend to be excited about. Mason sighed and stepped out into the biting cold, his breath forming clouds in the January air. The temperature had dropped again, well below freezing, making Lake Evergreen a solid sheet of ice that stretched out beyond his property. Inside the cabin, the babysitter, Mrs. Crenshaw from down the road, was helping Sophie with her homework at the kitchen table. "Dad!" Sophie's face lit up as she abandoned her math worksheet and ran to him. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her smile revealed a newly missing front tooth. Mason swept her up into a hug, momentarily forgetting the weight of the past 3 years without his wife. "Hey, kiddo. Sorry I'm late. How was school?" Mrs. Crenshaw gathered her things, waving away Mason's attempt to pay her. "You can settle up next week, dear. That little girl of yours is sharp as a tack, finished her reading assignment in no time." After the babysitter left, Mason prepared the pizza while Sophie chatted about her day, the science project on ecosystems, the playground drama at recess, and the fact that her teacher, Miss Jenkins, said she might qualify for the gifted program if her next test scores held steady. "That's amazing, Soph," Mason said, pride swelling in his chest. "Your mom would be so proud." The mention of Emily, his late wife, created the familiar pause in conversation, a moment of shared remembrance. That had become part of their routine. 3 years since the car accident, and sometimes the grief still felt as fresh as yesterday. "I know," Sophie said quietly, then brightened. "Oh, and Miss Jenkins said there might be scholarship money for summer camp if I get selected for the program." Summer camp, another expense Mason couldn't afford. Between the mortgage payments, medical bills from Emily's final weeks, and the cost of keeping their aging truck running, they were barely staying afloat. He'd already picked up extra shifts at the hardware store and was doing maintenance work at the nearby vacation cabins on weekends. "That's something to work toward," he said carefully, not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm. After dinner and Sophie's bedtime routine, teeth brushing, a chapter from their current bedtime story, and the ritual of checking under the bed for monsters, Mason sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills. The red final notice stamp on the electric company envelope made his stomach clench. He'd have to dip into the small emergency fund he'd been building. The one he'd promised himself was for Sophie's education. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trees surrounding the cabin. Mason gazed out the window at the moonlight, reflecting off the frozen lake. In a few weeks, the ice fishing competition would bring tourists to Lake Evergreen. Maybe he could pick up some extra work, guiding newcomers to the best spots. Anything to keep them going until spring. His phone buzzed, a text from his friend Derek, who ran maintenance at the Pines, an upscale resort on the other side of the lake. Need someone for emergency plumbing work tomorrow morning. 7 a.m., rich folks from the city with a busted pipe. Double rate. You in? Mason texted back immediately. I'll be there. He'd have to ask Mrs. Crenshaw to get Sophie on the school bus, but the extra money would help with the electric bill. He set his alarm for 5:30 a.m. and tried to get some sleep, the worries of financial survival temporarily kept at bay by the promise of work. Dawn broke over Lake Evergreen with a pale winter light. Mason was already up, making coffee and a quick breakfast for Sophie, who was still asleep. He scribbled a note explaining he had an early job and that Mrs. Crenshaw would be over soon, then slipped out into the frigid morning. The lake looked different in the early light, mysterious and vast. A thin mist hovered above the ice, creating an otherworldly scene. Mason's truck struggled to start in the cold, but eventually the engine turned over. He was about to put it in reverse when he noticed something unusual on the lake. A dark figure was moving slowly across the ice, about 100 yards from shore. Mason squinted through the windshield. It was a person, someone walking on the frozen lake. Locals knew better than to venture onto Lake Evergreen in January. The ice was notoriously unpredictable, especially after the warming trend they'd had last week. Mason rolled down his window. "Hey!" he shouted, but the figure didn't respond. Cursing under his breath, he grabbed his coat and stepped out of the truck. "The ice isn't safe," he called out louder. The figure, a woman he could now see, seemed to hesitate, then waved dismissively and continued walking. Mason could make out an expensive-looking coat and what appeared to be city boots, completely inadequate for walking on ice. "Tourist," he muttered. Every year, visitors from the city came up to the lake, ignoring local warnings and putting themselves in danger. Usually they stuck to the marked areas, but this woman was heading toward the center where the ice was thinnest. Mason faced a dilemma. He needed this job at the Pines. The money was crucial, but he couldn't just drive away knowing someone might be in danger. He checked his watch. If he hurried, maybe he could warn the woman and still make it to the Pines on time. He jogged down to the shore, careful of the slick ground. "Ma'am," he called out, "you need to come back. The ice isn't safe out there." The woman turned, and for a moment, Mason thought she would listen. But then she shook her head and pointed to something in the distance. Something Mason couldn't see from his angle. "I'm just taking photos," she called back, her voice carrying across the still morning air. "I'll be fine." Mason stepped onto the ice, testing it with his weight. Near the shore, it was solid enough. "Please," he insisted, taking a few careful steps toward her. "There was a thaw last week. The middle of the lake isn't frozen all the way through." The woman had stopped moving and appeared to be examining something on her phone. She was maybe in her mid-30s, with dark hair peeking out from under a knit cap. Even from this distance, Mason could tell her clothing was expensive, the kind sold in high-end stores in Chicago or New York, not the practical gear needed for a northern Wisconsin winter. Just as Mason was about to call out again, he heard it, a sound that sent chills down his spine, worse than any winter cold. A deep, resonant crack echoed across the lake, followed by the woman's startled cry. Mason broke into a careful but quick pace across the ice. "Don't move!" he shouted. "Stay exactly where you are!" The woman had frozen in place, fear evident even from a distance. "What was that?" she called, her voice higher with panic. "The ice is breaking," Mason replied, moving steadily closer. "You need to lie down, spread your weight out." He was about 30 yards away when another crack split the morning stillness. The woman gave a terrified yelp as the ice beneath her shifted. Mason's heart raced. He'd seen this before, ice giving way with almost no warning. "Get down on your stomach," he yelled, now close enough to see the terror in her eyes. "Now!" Too late. With a sickening crack, the ice beneath the woman gave way, and she plunged into the dark water of Lake Evergreen. Her scream was cut short as the freezing water engulfed her. Mason's training kicked in. As a teenager, he'd worked as a lifeguard at the lake during summers, and winter safety had been part of the job. He dropped to his stomach, distributing his weight across the ice, and crawled forward. The woman had resurfaced, gasping and flailing, her hands scrabbling at the edge of the ice, which kept breaking away under her desperate grip. "Help!" she sputtered, her face already pale from the shock of the cold water. "I'm coming!" Mason called, moving as quickly as he dared. "Try not to move too much." He knew she had minutes at most before hypothermia set in. The lake was deep here, at least 15 feet, and the current under the ice could easily pull her under if she lost her grip. When he was about 10 feet away, Mason pulled off his coat and laid it on the ice in front of him. He kept his boots on for traction and inched forward until he could almost reach her. "Grab my hand," he called, extending his arm as far as possible. The woman's teeth were chattering violently, her movements becoming sluggish, a dangerous sign. She reached toward him, but her hand fell short by inches. I can't," she gasped, her lips turning blue. Mason knew he had to risk getting closer. The ice groaned beneath him as he edged forward. Water had begun seeping through his jeans, where he lay on the wet surface, the cold instantly biting into his skin. "One more try," he urged. "Reach!" This time, their hands connected. Mason gripped her wrist firmly, feeling how cold her skin already was. "I've got you," he assured her. "Now don't pull. Kick your feet and help me get you horizontal." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The woman tried to follow his instructions, but her movements were becoming uncoordinated. Still, between his pulling and her weakening kicks, Mason managed to get her upper body onto the ice. Water streamed from her clothes, instantly beginning to freeze in the frigid air. "That's it," he encouraged. "Now we're going to roll you away from the hole, very slowly." With agonizing care, Mason pulled her fully onto the ice, then wrapped his coat around her shivering body. "We need to get you warm," he said, his own body beginning to shiver from the wet patches on his clothes. "Can you move at all?" The woman nodded feebly, her eyes unfocused. Trying," she stammered. "My cabin's closest," Mason said, helping her into a crawling position. "We need to stay low until we're closer to shore." The journey back was painfully slow. The woman, whose name Mason still didn't know, was rapidly losing coordination, a clear sign of advancing hypothermia. By the time they reached solid ground, Mason was practically dragging her. His phone had been in his coat pocket, which was now wrapped around the woman, and he couldn't risk taking it back yet. She needed every bit of warmth. With a strength born of necessity, Mason lifted her into his arms once they reached the shore and carried her up the path to his cabin. His muscles screamed in protest. She wasn't heavy, but the cold had sapped his energy, and the distance to the cabin seemed to have doubled. Just as they reached the porch steps, the front door flew open. Sophie stood there, eyes wide with shock. "Dad, what happened?" "Sophie, get Mrs. Crenshaw," Mason managed through chattering teeth. "Quick!" But there was no need. The older woman appeared behind Sophie, taking in the scene with calm efficiency. "Bring her in," Mrs. Crenshaw directed already, moving to clear the couch. "Sophie, get all the blankets from the linen closet." Mason laid the nearly unconscious woman on the couch. Her expensive clothes were stiff with ice, her face alarmingly pale. "Where am I?" she murmured, her eyes fluttering open briefly. "You're safe," Mason assured her, though he was worried by her confusion. "You fell through the ice. We need to get you warm." Mrs. Crenshaw had already begun removing the woman's frozen outer layers. "Sophie, put the kettle on," she instructed calmly. "Mason, go change into dry clothes before you end up in the same state." Mason hesitated, reluctant to leave the woman, but Mrs. Crenshaw shooed him away. "I was a nurse for 30 years before I retired. Go!" In his bedroom, Mason quickly stripped off his wet clothes and pulled on dry layers, his mind racing. The woman needed proper medical attention, but the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away in good weather. And what about his job at the Pines? He checked his watch. 7:15 a.m. He'd already missed the start time. When he returned to the living room, the woman was wrapped in every blanket they owned, with Sophie carefully placing hot water bottles around her. Mrs. Crenshaw was taking her pulse, her expression concerned but not alarmed. "How is she?" Mason asked. "Her pulse is steady, but she needs to warm up gradually," Mrs. Crenshaw replied. "I'd say mild to moderate hypothermia. We need to monitor her closely." Mason nodded and pulled out his phone to call Derek at the Pines. As expected, Derek was disappointed, but understood the emergency. "Another time, man," he said. "I hope the lady's okay." Next, Mason called the local clinic. Dr. Patterson, who'd been serving the Lake Evergreen community for decades, promised to come by as soon as he finished with an urgent case at the clinic. 15 minutes at most, he assured Mason. "Keep her warm but not hot. No alcohol, no caffeine. If she's conscious, sweet tea with plenty of sugar." Sophie had already prepared the tea and was carefully holding the mug to the woman's lips. The stranger's color was improving slightly, and she seemed more aware of her surroundings. "Thank you," she whispered to Sophie. "You're very kind." "I'm Sophie," his daughter said with the directness of childhood. "My dad saved you from the lake. Are you a princess? Your coat looks like something a princess would wear." The woman's lips curved into a weak smile. "Not a princess," she replied softly. "Just someone who should have listened to warnings." Her eyes found Mason's across the room. "Thank you. You risked your life for a complete stranger." Mason shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with surprising firmness. "They wouldn't have." There was something in her gaze, an intensity that seemed at odds with her physical weakness. Mason found himself wondering who exactly he'd pulled from the lake. "I'm Mason Reed," he said, approaching the couch. "And you are?" The woman hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. "Alex," she finally said. "Alexandra Winters." Mrs. Crenshaw was checking Alex's fingers and toes for signs of frostbite. "Well, Miss Winters, you're very lucky Mr. Reed here. Saw you on the lake. Another few minutes in that water." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what could have happened. "I realize that," Alex said. "I was being foolish. I wanted to photograph the sunrise over the lake. The hotel concierge said it would be spectacular from the center." "Which hotel are you staying at?" Mason asked. "The Pines," she answered. Mason raised his eyebrows. The Pines was the most expensive resort in the area, catering to wealthy vacationers from Chicago and beyond. A night there cost more than he earned. "In a week? They should have warned you about the ice," he said, trying to keep the edge from his voice. "The resort staff knew better. They should have explicitly told guests to stay off the lake." Alex nodded weakly. "They did have some sign in the lobby about staying on marked paths. I just didn't pay attention." She tried to sit up, but winced and lay back down. "My phone, I had it when I fell. All my contacts, my work, it's probably at the bottom of the lake now," Mason said gently. "I'm sorry." The loss of the phone seemed to distress Alex more than her near-death experience. "I need to call my office. They'll be expecting updates on the project." "You can use our phone when you're stronger," Mason offered, though he wondered what kind of job required updates while someone was on vacation. "But first, the doctor needs to check you out." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Dr. Patterson stepped in, snow dusting his grey hair and beard. "Heard we have a swimmer," he said, his tone light but his eyes serious as he sat down. His medical bag. While the doctor examined Alex, Mason took Sophie into the kitchen to give them privacy. "Is the lady going to be okay?" Sophie whispered. "I think so," Mason replied, pouring himself a much-needed cup of coffee. "Dr. Patterson will take good care of her." Sophie nodded solemnly. She has sad eyes, she observed. Like yours were after. Mom died. Mason was saved from responding by Mrs. Crenshaw, who joined them in the kitchen. Doctor says she's stable, but she shouldn't be moved today. She needs rest and warming. He's calling in a prescription to the pharmacy. Mason, would you be able to pick it up later? Mason nodded. Of course. Mrs. Crenshaw hesitated. There's something else. She's asked about getting back to the Pines to retrieve her things. But the doctor doesn't want her moving. I offered to go for her, but she seemed reluctant to give me her room information. Mason frowned. That's odd. Some city folks are particular about their privacy, Mrs. Crenshaw said with a shrug. Anyway, the doctor wants someone to stay with her today. I can stay until noon, but then I have to help at the community center lunch program. I can work from home, Mason said, though he knew it meant losing a day's pay at the hardware store. Sophie has school anyway. Oh, Sophie exclaimed, I'm going to be late. In the commotion of getting Sophie ready for school and seeing Mrs. Crenshaw and Dr. Patterson out, Mason almost missed the phone call from his boss at Wilson's Hardware. Almost, but not quite. Reed. Jeff Wilson's gruff voice came through the line. Where are you? We've got a delivery of snowblowers that need assembling before the weekend storm hits. Mason explained the situation as concisely as possible. So you've got some rich lady from the Pines taking up your couch, Jeff summarized. Mason, I get it's an emergency, but I need reliable people. This is the third shift you've missed this month. The first two were because Sophie was sick, Mason protested, and I can't just leave someone who nearly died. Can't she call someone from the resort to pick her up? Or a taxi? Jeff interrupted. Doctor says she shouldn't be moved today, Mason replied, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. There was a long silence on the other end. Look, Jeff finally said, you're a good worker when you're here, but I've got a business to run. If you can't make it in by noon, I'll have to give today's hours to Jake. Jake, the college kid who'd been making it clear he wanted more hours. Mason closed his eyes briefly. I understand, he said, though his stomach was knotting with anxiety. After hanging up, Mason returned to the living room to find Alex sitting up slightly, her color much improved, though she still looked exhausted. Your daughter is delightful, she said, and Mrs. Crenshaw tells me you're missing work to watch over me. Mason shrugged. It's fine. It's not, Alex countered, her voice stronger than before. You saved my life, and now you're losing income because of me. Please let me compensate you. The offer, though kind, stung Mason's pride. That's not necessary. Alex's eyes, a striking hazel color, Mason noticed for the first time, studied him carefully. You're not the type to accept help easily, are you, Mr. Reed? Mason, he corrected automatically. And no, I guess not. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. That makes two of us. She shifted slightly under the blankets. Since I'm imposing your hospitality, I should at least tell you why I'm really at Lake Evergreen. It's not for vacation. Mason raised an eyebrow, curious despite himself. I'm here to evaluate the Pines, she continued. My company is considering acquiring the property, and I need to assess its value and potential. You're a real estate agent? Mason asked. Alex laughed softly, then winced as the movement jarred her still recovering body. Not exactly. I'm the CEO of Horizon Technologies. She paused, clearly expecting a reaction. The name was vaguely familiar to Mason, something he'd probably seen in business news headlines while scrolling past to get to local stories. Technology company, he guessed? Yes, Alex said, seeming slightly surprised by his muted reaction. We develop software solutions for sustainable urban planning, among other things. Mason nodded. It explained the concern about contacting her office and her reluctance to share details with Mrs. Crenshaw. Tech executives probably had to worry about corporate espionage or whatever. So you're looking to buy the Pines as what, a corporate retreat? He asked. Something like that, Alex replied. But there was a hesitation in her voice that made Mason think there was more to the story. Before he could pursue it, Alex's eyes fluttered closed. "I'm sorry," she murmured, "still very tired." "Rest," Mason told her. "I'll be here if you need anything." As Alex drifted off to sleep, Mason settled into the armchair across from the couch. His mind whirled with the morning's events and the strange twist of fate that had brought a tech CEO into his modest cabin. Tomorrow, he'd need to figure out how to get Alex back to the Pines or wherever she needed to go. For now, though, all he could do was watch over his unexpected guest and wonder what else Alexandra Winters wasn't telling him. Outside, snow began to fall gently on Lake Evergreen, covering the dangerous hole in the ice where, just hours ago, two lives had collided in ways neither could have anticipated. The afternoon shadows had lengthened across Mason's living room by the time Alexandra Winters stirred again. Mason looked up from his laptop, where he'd been sending out job applications to supplement his increasingly unstable income at the hardware store. "What time is it?" Alex asked, her voice clearer than before. "Just past 4, Mason replied, closing his computer. "How are you feeling?" Alex pushed herself into a sitting position, the blankets pooling around her waist. Her hair had dried in unruly waves, a stark contrast to the polished businesswoman Mason imagined she usually presented to the world. "Better," she said, flexing her fingers experimentally. "Still cold to the bone, but I think I'll live." A wry smile crossed her face. "Thanks to you." Mason waved away the gratitude. "I made some soup if you're hungry. Nothing fancy, just chicken noodle from a can." "Soup sounds perfect," Alex said, attempting to stand but swaying slightly. Mason was at her side in an instant, steadying her. With a hand on her elbow, "Easy," he cautioned. "Dr. Patterson said you should take it slow." Alex nodded, allowing Mason to help her to the kitchen table. She was wearing borrowed clothes, an old flannel shirt of Mason's and a pair of sweatpants that Mrs. Crenshaw had brought over, both comically large on her slender frame. Yet somehow she carried herself with an innate dignity that made the mismatched outfit seem intentional rather than circumstantial. As Mason heated the soup, Alex glanced around the modest kitchen. Her gaze lingered on the refrigerator. Covered with Sophie's artwork and school papers, many marked with bright red A's. "Your daughter is quite accomplished," she observed. Mason smiled with undisguised pride. "She's smart. Gets that from her mother. Emily was working on her PhD in environmental science when—" He trailed off, the familiar pang of loss momentarily stealing his words. "I'm sorry," Alex said quietly. "How long has it been?" 3 years next month," Mason replied, bringing 2 steaming bowls to the table. "Car accident on an icy road. Sophie was 6. Alex's expression softened. "That's why you live here, by the lake?" Mason nodded. "We used to come up here in the summers. Emily's family had this cabin for generations. After she died, I couldn't bear to stay in Madison with all the memories, so I moved here permanently, found whatever work I could." "And sacrificed your own career in the process, I'm guessing," Alex said perceptively. Mason shrugged. "I was in construction management. Good money, but long hours. Up here, I can be there when Sophie gets home from school, even if it means patching. Together 3 different jobs to make ends meet." A thoughtful expression crossed Alex's face. "The work you were supposed to do today at the Pines, what was it exactly?" "Plumbing repairs," Mason replied. "I do maintenance work there sometimes when they're short-staffed. Pays better than the hardware store." Alex sipped her soup carefully. "You know, Before she could finish her thought, the front door burst. open, and Sophie bounded in, bringing a gust of cold air and childish exuberance with her. "Dad, Miss Winters, you're not going to believe what happened at school today." She dumped her backpack by the door and rushed to the table, eyes bright with excitement. "Miss Jenkins says I got the highest score in the whole 4th grade on the science assessment. I'm definitely going to get into the gifted program now." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mason exclaimed, giving her a one-armed hug. "Congratulations," Alex added with a genuine smile. "What was the assessment about?" "Ecosystems and environmental impact," Sophie replied, helping herself to a cookie from the jar on the counter. "I did my project on how pollution affects lake habitats. Miss Jenkins said it was remarkably thorough for a 4th grader." "She certainly sounds like her mother's daughter," Alex commented to Mason, who nodded with a mixture of pride and wistfulness. Sophie studied Alex with frank curiosity. "Are you feeling better? Dad was really worried. He called your hotel 3 times to let them know you were okay." Mason felt heat rise to his cheeks. "Sophie, it's true," Sophie insisted, "and he didn't go to work at all, because Dr. Patterson said someone needed to watch you." Alex looked at Mason with newfound appreciation. "Your father is a very kind man, Sophie. Not many people would go to such lengths for a stranger." "Dad always helps people," Sophie stated matter-of-factly. "Mom used to say he had a hero complex." Mason laughed uncomfortably. "Emily liked to tease. I just do what anyone would do." "And there's the problem with your worldview, Mr. Reed," Alex said, her businesslike tone returning. "You assume everyone shares your sense of responsibility and decency. I assure you, they don't." There was something in her voice, a hint of past disappointment perhaps, that made Mason wonder what experiences had shaped her perspective. Before he could pursue that thought, his phone rang. It was Jeff Wilson from the hardware store. "Excuse me," Mason said, stepping out onto the porch to take the call. The frigid air bit at his face as he answered. "Reed," Jeff's voice came through, sharper than usual. "I needed those snowblowers assembled today. The weekend storm's been upgraded to a potential blizzard, and we've got customers coming in first. Good thing tomorrow." "I'm sorry, Jeff. The woman I pulled from the lake needed—" "Save it," Jeff interrupted. "I gave the shift to Jake. Kid did twice the work you usually do in half the time." A cold feeling that had nothing to do with the temperature settled in Mason's stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Jake's looking for full-time work, and he doesn't have a kid getting sick every other week or neighbors falling through ice. I need reliability, Mason." "You're firing me?" Mason asked incredulously. "After 5 years?" There was a pause on the other end. "Not firing, just reducing your hours significantly. Jake will be taking most of the weekday shifts. I can give you Saturdays if you want them. 1 day a week." It was better than nothing, but nowhere near enough to cover the bills. Mason closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay calm. "I'll take the Saturdays," he said finally. "Good," Jeff replied, sounding relieved to have the conversation over with. "See you this weekend." Mason ended the call and stood on the porch for a long moment, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. The sun was setting over the frozen lake, painting the ice in shades of gold and pink, the same view that had lured Alex Winters into danger that morning. Had it only been a few hours, it felt like days. When he re-entered the cabin, Alex and Sophie were deep in conversation about Sophie's science project. Alex had a notebook in front of her, one of Sophie's school supplies, and was sketching what looked like a diagram. "If you add this component," she was saying, "you could demonstrate how certain pollutants move through different layers of the ecosystem." Sophie's eyes were wide with excitement. "That would be so cool, but I don't know if we have the materials." "Everything you need could be found at a basic hardware store," Alex assured her, then looked up as Mason entered. Her expression immediately shifted. "What's wrong?" Mason forced a smile for Sophie's benefit. "Nothing important. Hey, Soph, why don't you go ahead and start your homework? I need to talk to Ms. Winters about getting her back to her hotel. Sophie nodded, gathering her notebook. Can Ms. Winters help me with my science project later? She has amazing ideas. We'll see, Mason said non-committally. Homework first. Once Sophie had disappeared into her room, Mason slumped into a chair across from Alex. Jeff cut my hours at the hardware store down to just Saturdays. Alex's brow furrowed. Because you missed today? Partly, Mason admitted. There's a college kid who wants more hours, doesn't have family responsibilities. It makes business sense for Jeff. It makes short-sighted business sense, Alex corrected sharply. Loyalty and experience should count for something. Mason gave a humorless laugh. Maybe in your world. Around here, it's about who can stock shelves fastest and who's available whenever the boss calls. Alex studied him with those penetrating hazel eyes. What will you do? Pick up more maintenance work at the Pines if I can. Maybe see if the bait shop needs help for ice fishing season. Mason ran a hand through his hair. We'll get by, we always do. You shouldn't have to just get by, Mason, Alex said softly. The use of his first name, coupled with the genuine concern in her voice, created an unexpected moment of intimacy between them. Mason cleared his throat, uncomfortable with both her sympathy and his reaction to it. Anyway, he said briskly, we should figure out how to get you back to the Pines. Dr. Patterson said you shouldn't drive yourself yet, and my truck's not exactly luxury transportation, but I can take you whenever you're ready. Alex hesitated. Actually, if it's not an imposition, I'd prefer to stay one more night. The thought of dealing with work calls and emails right now is daunting. Mason raised an eyebrow in surprise. Don't you need to check in with your company? What was it? Horizon Technologies? I texted my assistant from your phone earlier, Alex explained. While you were making soup, I hope that was all right. Of course, Mason said, though he was surprised she hadn't mentioned it. So they know you're okay. They know I'm extending my assessment of the area by a day, Alex replied with a slight smile. The details of my misadventure on the ice can remain between us. Mason wasn't sure why she wanted to keep her near-death experience private, but it wasn't his business. You're welcome to stay, he said, though I should warn you, the couch isn't the most comfortable bed, and we're pretty no-frills around here. After nearly freezing to death, a slightly uncomfortable couch seems like a luxury, Alex remarked dryly. She glanced toward Sophie's room. Your daughter is remarkable, you know. Her understanding of environmental systems is advanced for her age. Pride warmed Mason's chest. She gets excited about science. Emily used to take her on field expeditions around the lake, collecting samples and identifying species. You've continued that tradition? Alex asked. Mason's smile faltered. When I can. Between work and everything else, there's not always time. You're doing an incredible job with her, Alex said earnestly. Single parenting is challenging enough without financial pressures. Mason shifted uncomfortably under her praise. Listen, about dinner tonight, I'd like to treat you both, Alex interrupted. Delivery from wherever good around here. It's the least I can do. Mason's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't need charity. But the thought of Sophie's delight at takeout food overrode his pride. There's a decent pizza place in town. They deliver even in winter. Alex's smile was victorious. Perfect. My treat. No arguments. That evening passed in unexpected comfort. They ate pizza around the coffee table, while Sophie regaled them with elaborate fourth-grade politics, and Alex shared G-rated stories about tech world disasters, servers crashing during major presentations, and executives accidentally setting off fire alarms. During important meetings, Mason found himself laughing more than he had in months. There was something disarming about Alexandra Winters. Despite her obvious wealth and status, she spoke to Sophie as an equal and seemed genuinely interested in their small-town lives, No condescension, no pity, just authentic engagement. After Sophie went to bed, Mason and Alex sat in companionable silence. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the cabin windows and reminding them of the harshness beyond their warm sanctuary. "The storm's coming in earlier than predicted," Mason observed, glancing outside at the swirling snow. "They're saying it could drop 2 feet by tomorrow night." Alex followed his gaze. "Will that make it difficult to get back to the Pines?" "Not impossible, but not pleasant," Mason replied. "The main roads get plowed pretty quickly, but the resort is up a winding access road. If it gets bad enough, they sometimes close it entirely." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "Mason, there's something I need to tell you about why I'm really at Lake Evergreen." Mason turned to face her, curiosity piqued by her serious tone. "I thought you were evaluating the Pines for acquisition." "That's part of it," Alex acknowledged, "but not the whole story." She took a deep breath. Horizon Technologies is planning to build a research center focused on environmental innovation. We've been scouting locations, places with diverse ecosystems that could benefit from sustainable development and conservation efforts. "And Lake Evergreen is on your list," Mason surmised. Alex nodded. "It's one of 3 finalists, the Pines. Property would be converted into a combination of research facilities and an educational center open to the public, with particular programs for schools." Mason absorbed this information, unsure how to feel about it. On one hand, it sounded like something Emily would have enthusiastically supported. On the other, change always brought uncertainty to small communities like theirs. "How would that affect the local economy?" he asked. "The Pines employs a lot of people around here. Seasonal work, but still important." "We would create more jobs, actually," Alex replied. "Year-round positions with benefits, and we'd prioritize hiring locally." It sounded too good to be true. "What's the catch?" Alex smiled at his directness. "The catch is that not everyone wants progress, even when it benefits them. Some of the vacation property owners around the lake are resistant to having a research facility in their playground, even one dedicated to preserving the very environment they enjoy." "Let me guess. They've been pressuring the owner of the Pines not to sell," Mason said. "Exactly," Alex confirmed, "which is why I came personally. And somewhat under the radar. I needed to see the property and surrounding area without dealing with politics first." Mason considered this, and nearly died in the process. Alex's laugh was self-deprecating. "Not my finest moment as a CEO, I'll admit." "So what happens now?" Mason asked. "Now," Alex said, shifting to face him more directly, "I'd like your opinion. As someone who knows this place intimately, would a research center be good for Lake Evergreen? For the community?" The question caught Mason off guard. "Why does my opinion matter?" "Because you care about this place," Alex replied simply. "Not as a vacation spot or a business opportunity, but as a home. And because I trust your judgment." The statement, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, left Mason momentarily speechless. "You barely know me," he finally said. "I'm a good judge of character," Alex countered. "It's essential in my line of work. And everything I've seen tells me you're someone whose perspective I should value." Mason looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment, yet oddly pleased by it. "I'd need to know more details before giving an opinion." "Fair enough," Alex agreed. "When we get back to the Pines tomorrow, I can show you the preliminary plans." The casual invitation surprised Mason. "You want me to come to the Pines?" "If you're willing," Alex said. "I'd value your insights, and well, it seems I owe you a proper meal at the very least." There was something in her tone, a hint of vulnerability beneath the confident exterior, that made Mason suspect Alexandra Winters wasn't accustomed to asking for help or advice. Before he could respond, his phone chimed with a weather alert. Winter storm warning upgraded to blizzard conditions, he read aloud. Starting at midnight, expected to last through tomorrow evening. Alex glanced at the already dark sky. Does that change our plans for tomorrow? Mason checked the detailed forecast. The roads will likely be impassable until the county plows come through. That could be late afternoon at the earliest, so I've imposed on your hospitality for yet another day, Alex concluded with a rueful smile. You're not imposing, Mason assured her, surprising himself with how much he meant it. But I should warn you, blizzard days mean board games and baking with Sophie. It's tradition. Alex's smile widened. I haven't played a board game in years, or baked anything, come to think of it. Then you're in for an education, Mason replied, returning her smile. Sophie takes both very seriously. As they settled in for the night, Mason preparing the couch for Alex with fresh blankets. An unexpected ease had developed between them, the tech billionaire and the small-town handyman finding common ground in the midst of a winter storm. Thank you, Mason, Alex said softly as he turned to leave. Not just for saving my life, but for letting me be just Alex for a little while. Mason paused in the doorway. As opposed to Alexandra Winters, CEO of Horizon Technologies, who's always on, always performing, always 3 steps ahead, she replied with a frankness that seemed to surprise even her. It's, refreshing to just be a person. Mason nodded, understanding better than she might have expected. After Emily died, he'd struggled with the roles thrust upon him, the grieving widower, the brave single father, the object of community pity. Sometimes you just wanted to exist without the weight of others' perceptions. Good night, just Alex, he said with a small smile. The storm's coming, so brace yourself for Sophie's waffle extravaganza in the morning. Alex's laughter followed him down the hall, a sound he found himself hoping to hear again. Outside, the first heavy flakes of the blizzard began to fall, coating Lake Evergreen in a fresh blanket of white. The dangerous hole in the ice where they'd met was already disappearing beneath nature's bandage, while inside the cabin something new and unexpected was just beginning to form. The blizzard arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train. Mason woke at dawn to the howling of wind and the distinctive silence that accompanied heavy snowfall. He peered out his bedroom window to find the world transformed into a white blur, snow accumulating rapidly on the porch railing he'd cleared just yesterday. After dressing in warm layers, he made his way to the living room, expecting to find Alex still asleep. Instead, she was sitting up on the couch, wrapped in blankets, staring out the window at the storm with an expression of wonder. I forgot how beautiful they are, she said without turning around. In Chicago, snowstorms are just inconveniences, traffic jams and flight delays. Out here, they're magnificent. Mason smiled at her unexpected poet and moved to the kitchen to start coffee. Beautiful but dangerous, he commented. We could lose power if it gets bad enough. Are you prepared for that? Alex asked, following him into the kitchen, still wrapped in a blanket like a cape. Generator in the shed, plenty of firewood, Mason assured her. We'll be fine. Might even be fun for Sophie. She loves when we have to pioneer it, as she calls it. Alex watched as he efficiently navigated the kitchen, starting coffee and pulling ingredients from the cupboard. You're very calm about potential disasters, she observed. Mason shrugged. Living up here, you learn to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Storms, power outages, frozen pipes, they're just part of life. Like pulling strangers from frozen lakes, Alex added with a raised eyebrow. That was a first, actually, Mason admitted with a grin, though I did have to help Derek from the Pines when he got his snowmobile stuck in a drift last winter. Not quite as dramatic. The coffee finished brewing, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Mason poured 2 cups, handing one to Alex, who accepted it gratefully. What are those? She asked, nodding toward the ingredients he'd assembled on the counter. Sophie's famous blizzard waffles, Mason replied. Heavy on the chocolate chips, light on nutritional value. Can I help? Alex asked, setting down her coffee and shrugging off the blanket. In the morning light, with her hair tousled from sleep and wearing borrowed clothes too large for her frame, Alexandra Winters looked nothing like the polished tech executive she claimed to be. Yet somehow, this version seemed more authentic. To Mason, more human. Sure, he said, sliding a mixing bowl toward her. You can handle the dry ingredients: 2 cups flour, tablespoon baking powder, pinch of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar. Alex approached the task with the same focus she presumably applied to corporate acquisitions, carefully measuring each ingredient as if the future of Horizon Technologies depended on it. Mason found himself smiling as he cracked eggs into a separate bowl. What? Alex asked, catching his expression. Nothing, Mason replied. Just, you're very thorough with those measurements. Alex's cheeks colored slightly. I don't cook much, but I approach it like any other process. Precision matters. Spoken like someone who's never baked with a 9-year-old, Mason teased. Sophie's approach is more improvisational. As if summoned by her name, Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair wild from sleep but eyes bright with excitement. Is it snowing? Are we making blizzard waffles? Can we build a snow fort later? Mason laughed. Yes, and we'll see. How bad the storm gets? Sophie bounced over to the counter, evaluating their progress. You're doing it wrong, she informed Alex with the brutal honesty of childhood. You have to add the chocolate chips to the dry ingredients so they get coated in flour. Otherwise, they all sink to the bottom. I stand corrected, Alex said solemnly, though her eyes danced with amusement. Would you care to demonstrate the proper technique? Sophie took over with authority, dumping a generous handful of chocolate chips into the flour mixture and stirring with enthusiasm. See, now they're all powdery, so they'll stay mixed in. Very scientific, Alex commented, catching Mason's eye over Sophie's head. Mom taught me, Sophie said, the statement matter of fact rather than sorrowful. She said cooking is just chemistry you can eat. Your mum sounds like she was very wise, Alex said gently. She was, Sophie confirmed. Dad has all her recipes, in a special box. He doesn't use them much, though. Mason focused intently on whisking the eggs, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Emily's recipe box was indeed tucked away in a kitchen cabinet, full of handwritten cards and notes he couldn't bring himself to look at too often. Sensing his discomfort, Alex smoothly redirected. Sophie, while we finish these waffles, why don't you tell me more about your science project? The diagram we started yesterday gave me some ideas. As Sophie launched into an enthusiastic explanation of lake ecosystems, Mason shot Alex a grateful look. She responded with a slight nod, understanding passing between them without words. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, confining them to the cabin, but creating an unexpected pocket of warmth within. As Mason watched his daughter and their unexpected guest collaborating on waffle batter, the billionaire CEO taking instruction from a 9-year-old with utter seriousness, he felt something shift inside him. Something he couldn't quite name, but recognized as dangerous in its own way, because Alexandra Winters would return to her world of corporate acquisitions and technological innovation as soon as the storm passed. And Mason Reed would remain here, at Lake Evergreen, patching together enough work to keep their modest life afloat. Their worlds had collided by chance on the frozen lake, but they were never meant to merge. No matter how right it felt in this moment, with chocolate chip waffles and coffee and laughter warming the kitchen on a blizzard-locked morning, Mason knew better than to mistake a temporary shelter for a permanent home. Still, as Alex caught his eye again, her smile unguarded and genuine, Mason couldn't help but wonder what might happen when the snow finally stopped falling. By midday, the blizzard had transformed Lake Evergreen into an otherworldly landscape. Snow clung to every surface, bending pine branches into heavy arcs and obliterating the boundaries between land, lake, and sky. Inside the cabin, Mason, Alex, and Sophie had settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. The dining table had become command central for Sophie's science project, with Alex guiding her through increasingly sophisticated concepts about water pollution and ecosystem preservation. Mason marveled at the ease between them. His daughter and this woman who, 48 hours ago, had been a stranger fighting for her life in freezing water. If we add this filtration component, Alex was explaining, sketching on a fresh page of Sophie's notebook, we can demonstrate how certain contaminants are removed naturally in healthy wetland systems. Sophie nodded eagerly, her own pencil flying across the paper, and we could use different colored water to show which pollutants get filtered and which ones don't. Exactly, Alex confirmed with an approving smile. You have excellent instincts. For experimental design, pride swelled in Mason's chest as he watched from the kitchen where he was preparing lunch. Sophie had always been bright, but seeing her intellectual curiosity nurtured by someone with Alex's expertise was something special. Emily would have loved this, he thought. Their daughter blossoming under the guidance of a passionate scientist, even if that guidance was temporary. Dad, Sophie called, breaking his reverie. Alex says her company builds special machines that can clean lakes like ours if they get polluted. Isn't that cool? Mason brought over grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Simple fare, but warm and filling for a winter day. Very cool, he agreed, setting the food on the table. We've developed several aquatic rehabilitation systems, Alex explained, helping clear space for the plates. They're designed to be minimally invasive while maximizing bioremediation processes. Bioremediation, Sophie repeated carefully, testing the word. That means using living things to clean up pollution, right? Precisely, Alex said, impressed. Most of our systems utilize specific bacteria, fungi, and plant species that naturally break down or absorb harmful compounds. As they ate, the conversation shifted to Alex's company and its environmental initiatives. Mason found himself genuinely interested, not just in the technology, but in the passion behind Alex's words as she described Horizon's mission. We're trying to bridge the gap between cutting-edge innovation and practical conservation, she explained. The problem with many environmental technologies is that they're either too expensive for widespread implementation or too complex for local communities to maintain. And your Lake Evergreen project would address that how? Mason asked, curious about her plans for their home. Alex hesitated, glancing at Sophie, who was listening with rapt attention. Well, the research center would serve as both a development hub for new technologies and an educational facility. We'd invite local schools for hands-on learning experiences, and community members could participate in citizen science initiatives. Like collecting water samples and stuff, Sophie asked excitedly. Exactly like that, Alex confirmed. In fact, students like you would be essential to our long-term monitoring programs. Mason watched his daughter's eyes light up at the prospect of being part of something so meaningful. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Emily had always wanted for Sophie, a chance to pursue her scientific interests in a substantive way. Would there be jobs for people who aren't scientists? He asked, thinking of the community's economic needs. Alex nodded. Administrative positions, maintenance and facilities management, educational coordinators, food service, security. A facility like this needs all kinds of skills. And we offer competitive salaries and benefits across the board. It sounded promising, perhaps too promising. And what's the downside? Mason pressed. There's always a catch with development projects. A flash of respect crossed Alex's face at his directness. Increased traffic, certainly. Some disruption during the construction phase. And yes, changes to the character of the area. We'd be transforming a vacation resort into a working research facility. Would people still be able to use the lake? Sophie asked, concern evident in her voice. The lake was as much a part of their family heritage as the cabin itself. Absolutely, Alex assured her. In fact, part of our mission would be ensuring the lake remains healthy and accessible for generations to come. We don't believe in walling off natural resources. Quite the opposite. Sophie seemed satisfied with this answer, but Mason remained cautious. He'd seen development promises come and go in small communities like theirs. The reality rarely matched the glossy initial presentations. "I'd like to see the actual plans," he said, "when we can get to the Pines." "Of course," Alex agreed readily. "Full transparency is important to me." The conversation might have continued, but a sudden, sharp, crackling noise from outside interrupted them. It was followed by a distinctive pop, and then the lights flickered once, twice, and went out. "Power's gone," Mason said, rising from his chair. "Not surprising with this wind." Sophie clapped her hands excitedly. "Pioneer time," Mason chuckled at her enthusiasm and moved to the windows to assess the situation. "Lines probably came down from ice buildup. Could be a while before crews can get out here." "Is that serious?" Alex asked, a note of concern in her voice. "Not for us," Mason assured her. "We've got the wood stove for heat, plenty of candles, and a generator for essential electricity. We'll be fine." He turned to Sophie. "Operation Pioneer is officially activated, Lieutenant Reed. Standard protocols." Sophie sprang to attention with a playful salute. "Yes, sir, Captain Reed." She turned to Alex. "I'm in charge of candles and flashlights. Dad handles the generator and firewood. You can be our official guest pioneer." Alex laughed, that same unguarded sound that Mason had found himself appreciating the night before. "I accept this responsibility with honor. What are my duties?" "Keeping me company while I get all the supplies," Sophie declared, grabbing Alex's hand and pulling her toward a closet in the hallway. While Sophie inducted Alex into their power outage protocols, Mason bundled up to venture outside. The generator was in the shed about 30 yards from the cabin, an unpleasant journey in blizzard conditions, but necessary to keep the refrigerator running and maintain some lights. He pushed open the front door to a wall of swirling white. The wind cut through his layers instantly, and snow pelted his face with surprising force. Bending his head against the onslaught, Mason carefully made his way down the porch steps, now completely buried under at least a foot of fresh snow. Each step was a battle against the elements. The usual path to the shed was completely obscured, forcing Mason to navigate by memory and the vague shape of trees through the blinding snow. By the time he reached the shed, his beard was crusted with ice, and his fingers, despite thick gloves, were beginning to lose sensation. The shed door was frozen shut, requiring several hard yanks before it gave way. Inside, the generator sat on a raised platform, a lesson learned after the spring floods 2 years ago. Mason checked the fuel level, primed the engine, and pulled the starter cord. "Nothing happened. Come on," he muttered, trying again with more force. The engine sputtered briefly, then died. After a third attempt, Mason realized the problem. The fuel line was likely frozen. It hadn't been an issue earlier in the winter, but the recent temperature fluctuations had probably allowed condensation to form and then freeze. This was a more significant problem. Without the generator, they'd have no electricity at all. The cabin would stay warm enough with the wood stove, but no power meant no water pump, which meant no running water. They had bottled water for drinking, but no flushing toilets or showers, not ideal with a guest in the house. Mason searched the shed for the portable propane heater he sometimes used for this exact situation. It would take time to thaw the fuel line, but it was their best option. After locating it and setting it up near the generator, Mason faced the daunting journey back to the cabin through the intensifying storm. The return trip proved even more challenging. The wind had shifted, now blowing directly into his face, and his earlier tracks had completely filled with fresh snow. Disoriented by the whiteout conditions, Mason found himself veering off course. The distance back to the cabin, normally a brief walk, stretched interminably as he pushed through snowdrifts reaching mid-thigh in places. Relief flooded him when the cabin's outline finally emerged from the swirling white. As he climbed the porch steps, the front door opened, revealing Alex's concerned face, illuminated by candlelight. "Thank goodness," she said, pulling him inside. "You were gone so long we were getting worried." Mason stomped snow from his boots, his face and hands burning as they began to warm. "Generator's fuel line is frozen. I set up a heater to thaw it, but it'll take some time." Sophie appeared from the kitchen, carrying a steaming mug. "Hot chocolate for the expedition leader," she announced, presenting it to Mason with ceremonial gravity. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he replied, accepting the mug gratefully. The warmth seeping through his gloves was almost painful as circulation returned. "The wood stove is fully operational," Sophie reported, continuing their game. "And we've established illumination stations throughout the base." Indeed, the cabin glowed with the warm light of candles, placed strategically around the living areas. The wood stove in the corner radiated welcome heat, and Mason noticed Alex had helped arrange blankets and pillows around it to create a cozy sitting area. "Impressive work," he commended, shucking his outer layers and hanging them to dry. "Sophie, did you explain about the water situation?" Sophie's expression turned serious. "I told Alex that without electricity, the pump doesn't work, so we have to use our emergency supplies. We have bottled water for drinking and cooking," Mason explained to Alex. "And I keep filled buckets in the bathroom for flushing. It's rustic, but functional." "I grew up camping in the Adirondacks," Alex replied with a reassuring smile. "I'm no stranger to roughing it." Somehow, the image of Alexandra Winters, tech billionaire and corporate powerhouse, roughing it in what was probably a luxury cabin with all modern amenities made Mason smile. Still, he appreciated her good-natured attitude about their situation. "I should check the generator again in about an hour," he said, sipping the hot chocolate. "Until then, we're officially in pioneer mode." "What exactly does pioneer mode entail?" Alex asked, settling onto the blanket nest by the wood stove. Sophie flopped down beside her. "Board games by candlelight, reading books, telling stories, and making shadow puppets on the wall," she explained enthusiastically. "And later, we can make s'mores in the wood stove." "Sounds perfect," Alex said sincerely, "though I should warn you I'm extremely competitive at board games." Sophie's eyes lit with challenge. "So am I. Dad always says I get that from Mum." "It's true," Mason confirmed, joining them on the blankets. "Emily was ruthless at Monopoly, no mercy, even for 6-year-olds. Good," Alex declared, "because neither do I." What followed was an epic Monopoly battle that lasted well into the afternoon. Alex proved to be a formidable opponent, deploying sophisticated strategies that Sophie quickly began to study and adapt. Mason, as usual, was the first eliminated, his tendency toward risky property investments proving as disastrous in the game as they sometimes did in real life. "You need to diversify your holdings," Alex advised as she collected his last dollars after he landed on her hotel-laden boardwalk. "Concentrating everything in one area leaves you vulnerable to market fluctuations." "I'll remember that next time I'm building my real estate empire," Mason replied dryly. Sophie, meanwhile, had constructed a surprising number of houses on the orange and red properties, creating a gauntlet that had already depleted Alex's cash reserves twice. "Your daughter has excellent tactical instincts," Alex commented to Mason as she narrowly avoided Sophie's development zone. "The middle properties have the highest landing probability due to the distribution of dice rolls and card effects." Did you just do probability calculations in your head during a casual family board game? Mason asked, amused. Alex's cheeks colored slightly. Force of habit. Risk assessment is part of my job. Risk assessment in Monopoly, Mason repeated, shaking his head with a smile. You really don't turn it off, do you? Not often, Alex admitted, though the past 2 days have been different. Their eyes met over the game board, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this strange interlude, forced by accident and weather, had somehow become meaningful to them both. The moment was broken by Sophie's triumphant cry as Alex landed squarely on New York Avenue with its 3 houses. "That's 600s," Sophie announced. Alex accepted defeat with good grace, counting out her remaining cash. "A well-executed strategy, Miss Reed. I underestimated your business acumen." Sophie beamed at the praise. "Want to play again? Or we could try Scrabble?" Before Alex could answer, Mason glanced at his watch. "I need to check the generator first. Keep our guest entertained, Soph." The blizzard showed no signs of abating as Mason once again battled his way to the shed. The portable heater had done its job, however, and this time, when he pulled the starter, the generator rumbled to life. After ensuring it was running smoothly, Mason connected the main power line to the cabin and secured the shed door against the storm. The return journey seemed even more treacherous than before. Night was falling early, as it did during winter storms, and visibility had deteriorated to mere feet. Mason found himself disoriented, the whiteout conditions making it nearly impossible to distinguish direction. He paused, breathing heavily, and tried to get his bearings. A golden glow pierced the whiteness, the cabin windows, now illuminated by electric light. Mason headed toward the beacon, relief washing over him as the building's outline solidified through the swirling snow. He was nearly to the porch when his foot plunged through a hidden hollow beneath the snow. Pain shot through his ankle as it twisted unnaturally, and Mason fell forward, barely catching himself with outstretched hands. For a moment, he lay half-buried in snow, the shock of the injury temporarily paralyzing him. When the initial wave of pain subsided, Mason cautiously tested his weight on the injured ankle. It held, but the sharp stab that accompanied even slight pressure told him it was at least a bad sprain, possibly worse. Gritting his teeth, he hobbled the remaining distance to the cabin and managed to climb the porch steps through sheer determination. The door opened as he reached for the handle, revealing Alex's concerned face. Her expression quickly shifted to alarm as she took in his snow-covered form and pained grimace. "What happened?" she asked, helping him inside. "Stepped wrong in a drift," Mason explained, trying to downplay the injury. "Twisted my ankle. It's nothing serious." Alex's skeptical look made it clear she wasn't convinced. "Let me see." Before Mason could protest, she was helping him to the couch and kneeling to examine his ankle. Her touch was surprisingly gentle as she carefully removed his boot and sock. "This is swelling already," she observed, fingers lightly probing the injury. "Does this hurt?" She pressed slightly on the outer ankle. Mason couldn't suppress a wince. "A bit." "And this?" She moved, her examination to another spot. "That's worse," he admitted through clenched teeth. Alex sat back on her heels, her expression serious. "I don't think it's broken, but it's definitely a bad sprain. You need to stay off it, keep it elevated, and get some ice on it immediately." "Ice is the one thing we have plenty of," Mason joked weakly, gesturing toward the window where snow continued to accumulate. Alex didn't smile. "This isn't funny, Mason. Mobility impairment during a blizzard could be dangerous. What if the generator fails again, or if the wood stove needs attention during the night?" Her genuine concern touched something in Mason that had been dormant for a long time. It had been years since anyone besides Sophie had worried about his well-being. Since Emily's death, he'd been the caretaker, the provider, the one who solved problems, Being on the receiving end of care felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. "I'll be fine," he insisted more gruffly than intended. "It's just a sprain." "Dad?" Sophie appeared from her bedroom, where she'd been reading. Her eyes widened at the sight of her father's swollen ankle. "What happened? Are you okay?" "Just a little accident in the snow, kiddo," Mason reassured her. "Nothing serious." Sophie looked unconvinced, but nodded bravely. "Should I get the first aid kit? It has those cold pack things." "Great idea," Alex praised her. "And maybe a pillow to elevate his foot?" As Sophie hurried to gather supplies, Alex fixed Mason with a penetrating look. "You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt," she said quietly. "Not for my benefit, and not for hers. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for." Mason sighed, the pain making it difficult to maintain his stoic facade. "Old habits," he admitted. "After Emily died, I felt like I had to be strong all the time, for Sophie." "Strength isn't about never showing pain," Alex said gently. "It's about facing challenges honestly, including accepting help when you need it." Before Mason could respond, Sophie returned with the first aid kit, a pillow, and a concerned expression that made her look far older than 9. "Dr. Patterson showed me how to wrap a sprained ankle when Lily fell during recess," she announced. "I can do it if you want, Dad." Mason's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "That would be great, Soph. Thank you." While Sophie carefully applied the cold pack and began wrapping his ankle with surprising skill, Alex slipped into the kitchen. Mason heard cupboards opening and closing, followed by the sound of running water, the electric pump now functional again thanks to the generator. She returned with a glass of water and 2 pain relievers. "The label says these are still good," she said, handing them to Mason. "They should help with the swelling and discomfort." Mason accepted both the medication and the implicit message. It was okay to acknowledge pain, to accept assistance, to be human rather than invulnerable. As he swallowed the pills, he felt a subtle shift in the dynamic between them. Alexandra Winters was no longer just a rescued stranger or an unexpected guest. In this moment of vulnerability, she had become something else entirely, a partner. In weathering the storm, both literal and figurative, outside, the blizzard continued to envelop Lake Evergreen in its frozen embrace, while inside, 3 people who had been strangers days ago found themselves forming connections none of them had anticipated. The night stretched ahead, full of uncertainty, about Mason's injury, about the storm's duration, about what would happen when the roads cleared and Alexandra Winters returned to her world of corporate acquisitions and technological innovation. But for now, in the warm glow of lamplight restored by Mason's efforts, those questions could wait. Sophie finished wrapping his ankle with a flourish. "All done. Dr. Sophie says you have to stay on the couch and let us take care of everything. Tonight. Doctor's orders, huh?" Mason said with a smile, ruffling her hair. "How can I argue with that?" "You can't," Alex confirmed, her eyes meeting his with warmth and something deeper that neither was ready to name. "For once, Mason Reed, you're going to let someone else be the hero." As Sophie began organizing an elaborate plan for dinner preparation, with Alex's help, Mason leaned back against the couch cushions. His ankle throbbed despite the medication, but a different sensation was spreading through his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the wood stove and everything to do with the dark-haired woman now laughing with his daughter in their small kitchen. It was dangerous, this feeling, temporary and impossible. Tomorrow or the next day, the snow would stop, the roads would clear, and their brief intersection of worlds would end. But tonight, as the wind howled outside and Sophie taught a billionaire CEO how to make her mother's famous snowstorm chili, Mason allowed himself to imagine just for a moment what it might be like if this unexpected refuge became something more permanent than a storm-bound interlude. Morning arrived with an unexpected silence. The howling, Wind that had been their constant companion for nearly 24 hours had finally ceased, leaving behind an almost eerie quiet. Alex woke on the living room couch. They had switched sleeping arrangements after Mason's injury, and for a moment she simply listened to the stillness. Pale winter sunlight filtered through the frost-edged windows, casting diamond patterns across the wooden floor. The generator's distant hum had stopped sometime during the night, but the power remained on, suggesting the utility crews had managed to restore the main lines. Alex sat up, stretching muscles sore from her makeshift bed. Despite the discomfort, she felt oddly refreshed. There was something about the simplicity of the past few days that had cleared her mind in ways that expensive retreats and meditation apps never had. From the kitchen came the gentle clatter of someone trying very hard to be quiet. Alex rose, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill, and padded toward the sound. Sophie stood on a step stool at the counter, carefully measuring coffee grounds into a filter. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration, her movements deliberate and precise. "Good morning," Alex said softly, not wanting to startle her. Sophie Turner, a smile brightening her face. "Morning. I'm making coffee for Dad. He always has. It first thing, but he can't walk good with his ankle, so I thought I'd surprise him." "That's very thoughtful," Alex replied, moving to help. "Does he take it a certain way?" "Just black," Sophie said. "Mum used to say he drinks it like punishment, but he says he likes the taste." Alex smiled at the glimpse into their family dynamic. "And what about you? Hot chocolate kind of girl?" "Usually," Sophie admitted, "but sometimes Dad lets me have coffee milk on special days. Just a little coffee with lots of milk and sugar. I'd say surviving a blizzard counts as a special day." Alex observed, reaching for a second mug. "How about I make you some coffee milk while you finish your dad's coffee?" Sophie's eyes lit up. "Really? Awesome." As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Alex found herself studying the child's profile. There was so much of Mason in her. Determined chin and direct gaze, but the way she meticulously completed each step of the coffee-making process, that precise attention to detail, reminded Alex of herself at that age. "The storm stopped," Sophie commented, carefully pouring hot water over the grounds. "Does that mean you have to leave today?" The question, asked with such innocent directness, caught Alex off guard. "I suppose that depends on the roads. And if your dad feels up to driving with his ankle," Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "He'll say he's fine, even if it hurts really bad. That's just how he is." "I've noticed that," Alex replied dryly. "Are you going to build that science place here?" Sophie asked, switching topics with the fluid adaptability of childhood. "The one where kids can help with experiments?" Alex hesitated. Her plans for the Lake Evergreen Research Center were still in the preliminary stages, competing with two other potential locations for Horizon's final investment. The decision would ultimately be based on practical factors: cost, accessibility, community support, regulatory hurdles. But standing in this cozy kitchen with this remarkable child, Alex found her usual clinical decision-making process colored by new considerations. What would it mean for families like the Reeds? For children like Sophie, with scientific minds hungry for opportunities beyond what a small town could typically provide? "I hope so," she answered honestly. "It's one of the places we're considering." Sophie carefully lifted the mug of black coffee. "If you build it, would you visit a lot?" Again, that directness that caught Alex off balance. "I would need to be here for the initial setup, yes." "That's good," Sophie said decisively. "Dad smiles, more when you're around, like he used to with Mom." Before Alex could formulate a response to this bombshell observation, Sophie was already heading toward the hallway with her father's coffee, moving with exaggerated care to avoid spilling. Alex stood frozen in the kitchen, her own mug halfway to her lips. Children had a way of cutting through pretense, of seeing connections and patterns adults tried to obscure even from themselves. Had she and Mason been so transparent? And more, unsettlingly, was Sophie right. The prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying. Alexandra Winters didn't do personal entanglements, not since her disastrous relationship with Horizon's former CFO, which had ended with both professional and emotional fallout that had taken years to overcome. She'd built walls around her private life, channeling all her passion and energy into her company instead. And yet, in the span of 3 days, a gruff single father with calloused hands and unwavering integrity had somehow slipped past those defenses without even trying. Alex took a steadying breath. This was ridiculous. She was allowing the unusual circumstances, the near-death experience, the isolation of the blizzard, the forced intimacy of sharing their living space, to manufacture an emotional connection that couldn't possibly translate to their real lives. When the roads cleared, she would return to the Pines, complete her assessment of the property, and fly back to Chicago. Mason would continue his life here at Lake Evergreen, finding work to replace his lost hours at the hardware store, raising his brilliant daughter, and eventually moving forward from his loss. Their paths had crossed by chance and would diverge by necessity. So why did that thought leave her feeling so hollow? Carrying her coffee and Sophie's coffee milk, Alex made her way to Mason's bedroom. The door was ajar, and she could hear Sophie's animated chatter as she described her coffee-making process in detail. Mason's rumbling responses were punctuated by genuine laughter, that unguarded sound that had surprised Alex from the first time she'd heard it. She knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Room service part 2, she announced, holding up the mugs. Mason was propped up in bed, his injured ankle elevated on a pillow, despite a night of discomfort evident in the shadows beneath. His eyes, he looked unexpectedly appealing, with his hair tousled from sleep and morning stubble darkening his jaw. "You two didn't have to do this," he protested weakly, even as he accepted the coffee with obvious gratitude. "We wanted to," Sophie declared, climbing carefully onto the foot of the bed with her own mug. "Alex made me coffee milk because surviving a blizzard is a special occasion." Mason raised an eyebrow at Alex, who shrugged innocently. "Seemed like sound logic to me." "Can't argue with that," Mason conceded, taking a sip of his coffee. "This is perfect, Soph. You've mastered the Reed family brewing technique." Sophie beamed at the praise. "I watched you do it like 100 times." She turned to Alex. "He counts to exactly 30 when he pours the water, not 29, not 31. Timing matters," Mason defended himself. "Right, Alex? Precision is important in any process." Alex agreed solemnly, though her eyes danced with amusement. They settled into a comfortable conversation, discussing the storm's aftermath visible through the bedroom window. Massive drifts that had transformed familiar landmarks into smooth sculptural forms. Eventually, Sophie drained her coffee milk and announced her intention to work on her science project diagrams. "I want to finish the filtration model before you have to leave," she explained to Alex, "so you can check if I got the science right." After, she bounded from the room, a silent moment stretched between the adults. "How's the ankle?" Alex asked finally, nodding toward his elevated foot. "Better," Mason replied, shifting slightly to demonstrate. He couldn't quite hide the wince that accompanied the movement. "Very convincing," Alex said dryly. Mason sighed, abandoning the pretense. "It hurts like hell, to be honest, but the swelling's down a bit. I'll be able to drive later if the roads get cleared." "There's no rush," Alex assured him. "The Pines isn't going anywhere, and neither are my plans for Horizon." Mason studied her over the rim of his coffee mug. "Sophie mentioned you might build the research center here." "It's one possibility," Alex acknowledged. "We're evaluating 3 locations. Lake Evergreen has several advantages: ecological diversity, relative proximity to Chicago, available property with existing infrastructure. And the disadvantages? Mason pressed. Alex hesitated, not because she wanted to hide anything, but because she was suddenly aware of how clinical her usual assessment process seemed in this context. Community resistance, potentially. Some of the vacation property owners have been vocal about keeping the area unspoiled by year-round activities, meaning they want their summer playground preserved exactly as is, regardless of what local permanent residents might need, Mason translated with a hint of bitterness. That's a fair assessment, Alex agreed. There's also the matter of the bitter winters. Operating a facility through conditions like this blizzard would require significant investment in infrastructure and emergency protocols. Mason nodded thoughtfully. Where else are you looking? A location in northern Michigan and one in southern Minnesota, Alex replied. Both have their own advantages and challenges. And when do you decide? The board meets in 3 weeks, Alex said. I'll present my recommendations then. Mason absorbed this information, his expression unreadable. 3 weeks isn't much time to evaluate everything properly. No, Alex admitted. It's not. Another silence fell between them, heavy with unasked questions and unspoken thoughts. From the living room came the sound of Sophie humming as she worked on her project, a reminder of innocence and simple joys amid their complicated adult considerations. I should let you rest, Alex said finally, rising from her perch on the edge of the bed. Doctor's orders, remember? Mason reached out, his hand catching hers before she could step away. The contact was electric, sending a current up Alex's arm that had nothing to do with static in the winter dry air. Thank you, he said, his voice low and earnest. Not just for the coffee, for everything with Sophie, for making this bizarre situation feel normal somehow. Alex found herself momentarily at a loss for words, a rarity for someone who regularly addressed boardrooms and investor conferences. She's a remarkable child, she finally managed. You've done an amazing job with her. Sometimes I wonder, Mason confessed, his grip on her hand loosening but not releasing. If Emily would think so, if she'd approve of how I've raised Sophie these past 3 years. The vulnerability in his admission touched Alex deeply. This was a side of Mason Reed she suspected few people ever saw. The uncertainty beneath the capable exterior. From everything you've told me about Emily, Alex said gently, I think she'd be incredibly proud of both of you. Mason's eyes, a deep blue that reminded Alex of the lake in summer pictures she'd seen in the cabin, held hers for a long moment. Something passed between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name. Then he released her hand, clearing his throat. I should try to get up, see what needs doing after the storm. What needs doing is resting that ankle, Alex countered firmly. Sophie and I can handle things. The generator's still running, the power's back on, and from what I can see, we're thoroughly snowed in for at least another day. Mason looked like he might argue, but instead a rueful smile crossed his face. Not used to sitting still. Consider it a learning opportunity, Alex suggested with mock seriousness. Delegate, it's an essential leadership skill. Is that what they teach in CEO school? Mason teased. Exactly that, along with Power Stance 101 and intimidating boardroom glares, Alex replied, straight-faced. Mason's laughter followed her out of the room, warming her more effectively than the coffee ever could. By midday, the world outside had transformed from threatening to merely inconvenient. Brilliant sunshine reflected off the pristine snow, creating a dazzling brightness that was almost painful to behold. The county snowplows had begun clearing. The main roads, their distant rumbling occasionally breaking the post-storm quiet. Alex stood on the cabin's front porch, wrapped in one of Mason's heavy jackets, surveying the winter wonderland. The snow had drifted against the cabin in sculpted waves, completely burying Mason's truck up to its windows. The path to the shed had vanished, and the shoreline of the lake was indistinguishable from the snowy expanse beyond. The door opened behind her, and Sophie emerged, bundled in a puffy purple coat and matching snow pants. "Dad says I can go out if you come with me," she announced. "He's trying to use his crutches, but he keeps bumping into things and saying words I'm not supposed to hear." Alex laughed, picturing Mason's frustration at his temporary immobility. "I'd be happy to supervise your snow exploration. Any particular mission in mind?" "Snow fort," Sophie declared. "The biggest one ever, and maybe a snow person family to guard it." "Ambitious," Alex commented. "I like it." Together, they waded into the snow, which reached Sophie's waist in places. The child's delight was infectious as she flopped backward to make snow angels and tried to catch snowflakes on her tongue, despite the clear sky. "Have you ever built a snow fort before?" Sophie asked as they began packing snow for the base. "Not since I was about your age," Alex admitted. "My father was in the diplomatic corps, so we lived in several different countries. I built a snow fort with some local children in Finland when I was 10. Sophie's eyes widened. "You lived in Finland? That's so cool. Did you see reindeer?" "I did," Alex confirmed, smiling at the memory. "And the northern lights." "I want to see those someday," Sophie said wistfully. "Mom had pictures of them in one of her science books. She said they're like the sky's magic dance." "That's a beautiful description," Alex replied, touched by the image. "And very accurate." They worked companionably on the snow fort, Sophie chattering about school friends and science projects, while Alex found herself sharing stories of her own childhood travels, edited versions that emphasized cultural experiences rather than the loneliness of being constantly uprooted. "Is that why you like to build things now?" Sophie asked perceptively as they shaped the fort's entrance. "Because you moved around so much as a kid?" Alex paused, snow-packed hands suspended. "Mid-task. What do you mean?" "Well, you build that big company that makes stuff to help the environment," Sophie explained. "And now you want to build the science center here. Is it because you didn't have a place that was always yours when you were little?" The insight, delivered with a child's innocent directness, pierced through layers of self-analysis Alex had paid therapists thousands of dollars to provide. She had never connected her drive to create lasting institutions with her nomadic childhood, but the correlation seemed obvious, once articulated. "That's remarkably astute, Sophie," Alex said. "Finally, you might be right. I've never thought about it that way." Sophie nodded sagely. "Dad says I notice things other people miss. He says I got that from Mom." "It's a valuable skill," Alex told her, genuinely impressed. "In science and in life." They resumed their snow fort construction, but Alex's mind kept returning to Sophie's. Observation. Was that the psychological underpinning of her relentless drive, creating permanent structures, both literal and figurative, to compensate for a childhood spent in temporary homes? If so, what did it mean that for the first time in her adult life, she felt more at home in this modest cabin with near strangers than in her meticulously designed Chicago penthouse? Their snow fort was taking impressive shape when a vehicle's engine broke the stillness. Alex looked up to see a county plow truck approaching on the access road, followed by a salt spreader. "They're clearing our road," Sophie exclaimed, waving enthusiastically at the drivers. The lead driver waved back, then lowered his window as he brought the plow to a stop near the cabin. "Road's clear all the way to town, Miss Sophie," he called. "Your dad need anything? We're checking on all the year-rounders." "We're okay, Mr. Daniels," Sophie called back. "But my dad hurt his ankle in the storm." The driver, apparently Mr. Daniels, looked concerned. "Bad? Just a sprain," Alex answered, standing up. "But he shouldn't be driving yet." Mr. Daniels nodded, studying Alex with barely concealed curiosity. Clearly, strangers at the Reed cabin in midwinter were unusual enough to note. "Well, tell him Carl said the hardware store's open if he needs anything, power's back on in town, and the grocery got a delivery this morning." "Thank you," Alex replied. "We appreciate the update." After the plow continued down the road, Sophie turned to Alex with a troubled expression. "Does this mean you have to leave now, since the roads are clear?" The question echoed Alex's own thoughts. With the roads open, there was no practical reason for her to remain at the cabin. She should return to the Pines, contact her team, and resume her professional responsibilities. The storm-enforced interlude was over, yet the thought of leaving filled her with an unexpected reluctance, not just because of Mason, though that was certainly part of it, but because of the genuine connection she'd formed with Sophie as well. The simple rhythms of cabin life, even with its challenges, had awakened something in Alex that had been dormant for too long. "I should probably go back to my hotel," she said carefully. "But your dad shouldn't drive with his injury, and you both might need supplies after being snowed in." Sophie's face fell, but she nodded with the resilience of a child accustomed to disappointment. "Yeah, I know. Grown-up stuff is important." The simple statement, delivered without rancor but with clear understanding, struck Alex profoundly. How many children had she inadvertently disappointed with grown-up stuff priorities? Her nieces and nephews, whose birthdays and school events she frequently missed for business obligations. The children her college friends had, whose growth she tracked through holiday cards rather than personal involvement. "Tell you what," Alex said impulsively. "How about I go to town for supplies, check in at the Pines to handle a few work matters, and then come back here for one more night? That way your dad can rest his ankle properly, and I can see if our snow fort survives until—" "Tomorrow?" Sophie's expression brightened instantly. "Really, you'll come back?" "If that's okay with your dad," Alex qualified, suddenly realizing she was making promises without consulting Mason. "He'll say yes," Sophie stated with absolute certainty. "He likes having you here. I can tell." Again, that perceptiveness that caught Alex off guard. "Well, we should ask him anyway," she said, brushing snow from her borrowed coat. "Let's go see what supplies he thinks we need." They found Mason in the living room, awkwardly maneuvering on makeshift crutches fashioned from old broom handles. His frustrated expression softened when Sophie burst through the door, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "Dad! We made the best snow fort ever, and the plows came, and Alex is going to town for supplies and then coming back to stay one more night. Is that okay? Please say it's okay." Mason's eyebrows rose, his gaze moving from his daughter to Alex. "Is that so?" Alex felt a flush that had nothing to do with the cold rise to her cheeks. "I offered to get supplies, since you shouldn't drive yet, and I need to check in at the Pines and handle a few work matters, but if it's not imposing, I could come back afterward." "You've already missed several days of work because of me," Mason pointed out. "Are you sure you can spare another night?" There was something in his tone, a carefulness that suggested he was asking more than the surface question. Was he giving her an easy out, or hoping, as she was, for a little more time in this unexpected connection they'd formed? "I'm the CEO," Alex replied with a small smile. "One of the few perks is setting my own schedule, and I promised Sophie I'd see if our snow fort survives the night." "Well, we can't leave such important architectural validation to chance," Mason said, his own smile emerging. "Of course you're welcome to come back. More than welcome." The warmth in his voice sent a flutter through Alex's stomach that she hadn't experienced in years. It was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying, this feeling of falling without knowing where or how she might land. "Great!" Sophie exclaimed, breaking the moment. "Can we make a grocery list? We need hot chocolate and marshmallows and—" "Whoa, slow down," Mason laughed. "Let's think about actual food first, then treats." As they compiled a practical list of supplies, Alex found herself memorizing small details she hadn't consciously noted before. The way Mason's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at Sophie's enthusiasm, the gentle firmness with which he steered his daughter away from an all-sugar shopping list, the comfortable harmony of their father-daughter dynamic, even in mundane tasks. Tomorrow, she would have to leave for real. Return to Chicago, to Horizon Technologies, to board meetings and investment decisions and the 1,000 responsibilities that defined her life. The Lake Evergreen project would proceed based on business factors, not personal connections. But tonight, one more night in this cabin that had become an unexpected sanctuary. She would allow herself to explore what it might feel like to be part of something simpler and more meaningful than quarterly earnings and technological innovations. Just one more night to understand what Sophie had observed with such clarity. That something significant had changed for all of them when a single step on thin ice had brought their worlds together. 6 weeks later, the last traces of winter were reluctantly retreating from Lake Evergreen. Patches of snow still lingered in shaded areas, but the lake itself had transformed from a solid sheet of ice to gleaming water that rippled in the early spring breeze. Mason stood on the shore, watching Sophie skip stones across the surface. Her technique had improved dramatically over the past few weekends, a testament to her persistent practice and natural aptitude for understanding physical principles. 7 skips, she called triumphantly as her latest stone danced across the water before disappearing beneath the surface. That's my new record. Impressive, Mason acknowledged with a smile. Your mom never managed more than 5. Sophie beamed. At the comparison, always hungry for these small connections to the mother she was gradually forgetting in the details, if not in spirit. Do you think Alex will beat her record when she visits next weekend? Mason's heart performed its now familiar skip at the mention of Alexandra Winters. Maybe, he replied, trying to keep his tone casual, though she admitted she was terrible at stone skipping as a kid. She just needs practice, Sophie declared confidently, like with the snowman building. Mason smiled at the memory. After Alex's return from the pines that final night of the blizzard, they had added a snow family to guard Sophie's fort. Alex's attempt at a snowman had been amusingly lopsided, prompting Sophie to give an impromptu lesson in proper snow sculpting technique. The evening that followed had been both wonderful and bittersweet. A final meal together, board games by the fireplace, and conversations that stretched late into the night after Sophie went to bed. Conversations where barriers had fallen away, revealing shared values and complementary differences that made their connection all the more compelling. When morning came, they had both recognized the inevitable. Alex needed to return to Chicago, to her company, to the board meeting where the fate of the Lake Evergreen project would be decided. Mason needed to focus on finding replacement work for his lost hardware store hours and helping Sophie prepare for her science fair. They had parted, with a careful hug and promises to stay in touch. Promises Mason had privately doubted would withstand the gravitational pull of Alex's high-powered life. He had been wrong. The text messages began that same evening, Alex sharing her safe arrival in Chicago and asking how his ankle was healing. Simple communication that gradually evolved into daily check-ins, phone calls when Sophie wanted to discuss her science project, and eventually weekend visits that had become the highlight of both read calendars. Those weekend visits had quickly established their own rituals. Alex would arrive Friday evenings, often bearing presents that were educational yet fun, a microscope that could connect to a laptop for Sophie, field guides for identifying spring wildflowers, even a small drone for surveying the lake ecosystem from above. Saturday mornings were devoted to Sophie's science endeavors, afternoons to exploring the wilderness surrounding Lake Evergreen, and evenings to marathon board game competitions that often left them laughing until their sides ached. Sundays were quieter. Brunch at the town's only cafe, where Alex was gradually becoming a familiar face to the local residents. Then lazy afternoons at the cabin, where Mason and Alex would talk for hours, while Sophie immersed herself in books or experiments. The departures each Sunday evening grew increasingly difficult, with longer embraces and promises for the next weekend. During the week, Mason had cobbled together enough work to keep them afloat. Weekend shifts at the hardware store, maintenance, jobs at several vacation cabins, and occasional carpentry commissions from townspeople who valued his craftsmanship. It wasn't ideal, but it was sustainable, at least until something better came along. "Dad?" Sophie's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you worried about the meeting?" Mason sighed. Today was the day Horizon's board would vote on the Lake Evergreen project. Despite Alex's optimism, the decision wasn't guaranteed. The other two locations had their own advantages, and some board members remained skeptical about the winter accessibility issues. "Not worried," Mason answered honestly. "Just hopeful." The research center would transform their community, bringing year-round jobs with benefits, educational opportunities for local children, and a renewed purpose for the lake beyond seasonal recreation. Alex had been meticulous in addressing community concerns, modifying plans to preserve the natural beauty of the area while maximizing economic and environmental benefits. In the weeks since the blizzard, she had organized several virtual town halls, inviting local residents to express concerns and contribute ideas. Mason had watched with admiration as she fielded difficult questions with transparent honesty, never promising more than she could deliver, but painting a vision of coexistence between technology and nature that won over many skeptics. The most vocal opposition came from wealthy vacation property owners who worried about increased activity disturbing their seasonal idyll. But even they had begun to soften as Alex emphasized how the research center's environmental protections would preserve water quality and natural habitats for generations to come. Alex said it would be okay either way, Sophie reminded him, selecting another stone with careful deliberation. She said she'd still visit us, even if they build it in Minnesota. That was true. Alex had been clear that their personal connection wasn't contingent on the professional decision. Still, Mason knew the practicalities involved. Chicago to Lake Evergreen was a manageable weekend trip. Chicago to northern Minnesota was considerably less convenient. "Let's just enjoy the day," Mason suggested, not wanting Sophie to sense his anxiety. "The weather's perfect for your science presentation practice." Sophie had been selected as a finalist in the regional science fair. Her project on lake ecosystem filtration, developed with Alex's guidance, had impressed the judges at the school level. Now she was preparing to present to a larger audience at the county competition. The transformation in Sophie over these weeks had been remarkable. Always bright, she now possessed a confidence that came from having her intellect recognized and nurtured. Her teachers had commented on her increased participation in class discussions, her detailed questions, her willingness to help classmates grasp difficult concepts. "Can we practice after lunch?" Sophie asked. "I want to get to 10 skips first." Mason laughed. "Ambitious, but sure, lunch first, then science, then stone skipping mastery." They were heading back toward the cabin when Mason's phone rang. Alex's name flashed on the screen, sending a jolt of anticipation through him. "It's Alex," he told Sophie, who immediately abandoned all thoughts of lunch to the crowd close to the phone. Mason answered, putting it on speaker. "Hey there, we were just talking about you." "All good things, I hope," Alex's voice came through, warm but with an undercurrent of something Mason couldn't identify. "Sophie's determined to teach you proper stone skipping technique next weekend," he replied, Apparently, your snowman building skills have led her to doubt your general outdoor capabilities. Alex's laughter held a nervous quality that instantly heightened Mason's awareness. "About next weekend," she began. Mason's heart sank. This was it, the inevitable cancellation, as her real life reclaimed her attention. He'd been preparing himself for this moment, telling himself that the past 6 weeks had been a beautiful aberration that couldn't last. "I might need to come a day early," Alex continued, surprising him. "If that works for you two." "Of course," Sophie exclaimed before Mason could respond. "We can miss school on Friday if you want to do something fun." "Nice try," Mason interjected, with a chuckle. "But yes, a day early works fine. Everything okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The board just finished voting," Alex said finally. Mason held his breath, feeling Sophie tense beside him. "And Lake Evergreen won," Alex announced, her professional composure finally breaking into audible excitement. "Not just one, it was unanimous once I presented the revised community integration plan. We're moving forward immediately." Sophie let out a whoop of joy, spinning in circles along the shoreline. Mason found himself momentarily speechless, the implications washing over him like the gentle waves now lapping at the lake's edge. "That's incredible news," he managed finally. "Congratulations, Alex. I know how much this project means to you." "It means something to all of us now," Alex replied softly, "which is why I need to come early. There's so much to discuss with the community, and I want you and Sophie to be part of the first announcements." "Us? Why?" "Because you two are the reason this location won," Alex said simply. "My personal experience here, seeing how the research center could benefit families like yours, understanding the community through your eyes, that made all the difference in my presentation. The board was particularly moved by the educational outreach potential, especially after I showed them Sophie's science project photos." Mason raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You showed the board Sophie's project?" "As an example of the brilliant young minds in the area who deserve access to cutting-edge scientific resources," Alex confirmed. "I hope that was okay." "More than okay," Mason assured her, watching Sophie's face light up with pride. "Right, Soph?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Does this mean I get to see the real laboratories when they're built, with actual scientists working there?" "Absolutely," Alex promised. "In fact, we're planning a special junior researcher program for local students. I was hoping you might help us design it." Sophie's eyes widened to saucers. "Me? Really?" "Really," Alex affirmed. "Your perspective would be invaluable." Mason swallowed the unexpected emotion rising in his throat. "We're happy to help however we can." "There's more," Alex continued, her voice taking on an uncertain quality rarely heard from the confident CEO. "The project director position, overseeing the construction and eventual operation of the facility. It needs someone who understands construction management, who knows the local community, and who cares deeply about both the environmental mission and educational components." Mason froze, comprehension dawning slowly. "Alex, are you saying—" "I'd like you to consider taking the position," she confirmed. "Your construction background makes you qualified, and your dedication to this place makes you perfect. The salary is substantial, with full benefits, and the hours would be regular. No more piecing together multiple jobs." Mason's mind reeled with the possibility, a single stable job that utilized his professional skills. Healthcare benefits for Sophie, financial security they hadn't known since Emily's death. "The board has already approved the hire," Alex added, when Mason remained silent. "They were impressed by your resume, especially the downtown Madison development project you managed before." She trailed off, both of them aware she meant before Emily's death changed everything. "How did you know about that project?" "Mason, Asked genuinely curious. Alex hesitated. I might have done some research. Professional research, of course. Of course, Mason echoed, unable to suppress a smile at the thought of Alexandra Winters, CEO of Horizon Technologies, searching for information about a small-town handyman. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Say you'll think about it. Alex replied. This isn't just a job offer, Mason. It's also a reason for me to be at Lake Evergreen more regularly. For official business, of course. The slight hesitation in her voice conveyed volumes about the personal implications beneath the professional offer. Of course, Mason echoed, his smile widening. For official business. Sophie, who'd been listening intently, tugged at her father's sleeve. Dad, say yes! Then Alex can help with my science projects all the time, not just on weekends. Both. Adults laughed, the tension breaking. You have a very persuasive campaign manager there, Alex observed. She comes by it honestly, Mason replied. Her mother was very convincing when she wanted something too. The mention of Emily no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Instead, there was a gentle warmth, a recognition that her memory could coexist with new happiness. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. There's something else, Alex said after a moment, her tone shifting to something more serious. I've been offered the chance to relocate to oversee the project personally. It would mean spending at least half my time at Lake Evergreen, at least during the initial 2-year construction phase. Mason's pulse quickened. And Horizon is okay with their CEO being away from headquarters that much. They are when the CEO is also the founder and majority shareholder, Alex replied, with a hint of her characteristic confidence. Besides, technology makes remote leadership possible. I'd still be in Chicago regularly for key meetings and events. So, you'd be here, Mason began. A lot, Alex finished. If that's something you both would welcome. The question hung in the air, its significance clear to all three of them. I think we could adjust to that arrangement, Mason said carefully, though his tone conveyed much more than his words. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon, Alex promised. We can discuss all the details then. I'll think about it, Mason said finally, though they all knew his answer was already forming. But right now, someone has promised to teach me how to skip stones properly before our official business meeting. I expect a full demonstration on Friday, Alex responded, the smile evident in her voice. From both of you. After they ended the call, Mason and Sophie stood together at the lake's edge, watching the sunlight dance across the water that had once been ice, the very spot where an accidental step had changed everything. Dad, Sophie said thoughtfully, selecting a perfect skipping stone from her collection. I think Mom would really like Alex. Mason wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders, marveling at her perceptive heart. I think so too, kiddo. Mom always said you needed someone who could match your stubbornness, Sophie continued, surprising Mason with this previously unshared memory. She told me that when I was little, but I remember it. Mason felt his throat tighten with emotion. Your mom was very wise. Alex is stubborn too, Sophie observed matter-of-factly. In a good way, like you. Is that your expert analysis? Mason asked, trying to lighten the moment. Sophie nodded decisively. Yep. Scientific observation. Also, you both get the same crinkly eyes when you're happy, and you've had crinkly eyes a lot more since we met Alex. With that simple truth delivered, Sophie turned her attention back to the lake. She drew back her arm and released the stone with perfect form. It skipped across the surface, once, twice, 7 times, 9 times, before disappearing beneath the sparkling water. 10 skips, she exclaimed triumphantly. A new record! Mason smiled, thinking how appropriate the metaphor was. Sometimes a single action, one step, one stone's throw, one rescue on a winter morning, could create ripples that transformed everything they touched, connecting shores that had once seemed impossibly distant. That evening, as Sophie slept, Mason sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking out. At the lake, now silvered by moonlight, he found himself mentally rearranging the cabin to accommodate a more frequent visitor, perhaps converting the small storage room into a proper office where Alex could work remotely when needed. His phone chimed with a text message from Alex. Just finished call with architects. Initial designs for the research center look amazing. Can't wait to show you tomorrow. Sleep well. Mason typed back, looking forward to it. The job offer too. Already know my answer. 3 dots appeared immediately, then, and? Yes, Mason replied simply, to everything. Another pause, then, tomorrow can't come soon enough. Mason slipped the phone back into his pocket, a sense of peace settling over him that he hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow would bring practical discussions, salary negotiations, job responsibilities, logistical arrangements. But beneath those pragmatic concerns lay something far more precious, the foundation of a new beginning. As father and daughter had turned toward home earlier that day, the spring sun warm on their backs, Mason had felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 long years, the sensation of moving forward rather than simply surviving. And somewhere on the road from Chicago, Alexandra Winters was already planning her return to the place and people who had unexpectedly become her home. The hole in the ice had long since healed, leaving no trace of the near tragedy that had brought them together. But the connection forged in that moment of rescue had created something new and enduring, a second chance that none of them had been looking for, but all of them now treasured beyond measure. In the quiet of the evening, with his daughter sleeping peacefully and new possibilities on the horizon, Mason gazed at the lake that had nearly claimed a life, but had ultimately given them something infinitely more precious, a future bright with promise, built on the unexpected foundation of a frozen moment that had changed everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us,